Yep, the recording is started. Deepak, over to you.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen, which talks about uh, community introduction, the group introduction here. So welcome and thank you so much everyone to joining us together here on our 33rd session. I hope it's called 33rd, right? And it will let me quickly walk you through about the group introduction and a few things about the race session, and towards we'll announce the next session as well. Please note any information views we are expressing in this session. It's purely uh, presenters, speakers' personal views, and it's not related to their employers or Microsoft. In any demo we are going to walk you through. It's going to be console database. And yes, this session is recording, so please be keep in mind the session is going to be recorded. If you disagree with the recording, I would suggest to drop and watch the recording later. And finally, I think I'm missing one thing here. Yes, that's all. Thank you. So a few bits about this group, which we started around 2 years back, and now we are having nearly 2,400 plus members. And the core member groups are Rachit, Umesh, Satya, and myself. I recently joined this group as a volunteer, and we are on many social platform, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. I would urge everyone to look out our social media channels, and you will get a lot of learning material about the past session which we delivered. And please do subscribe so you won't miss any update coming in the future. You see, this is our YouTube channel handle, and here you can go to all the last session which we delivered. So far, we have delivered 32 sessions on different streams with many experts on the channel. So please look at this channel, and there are 31 videos uploaded so far. I think this should be 32 as it's the third session. So today's session, Johan joining us from Sweden for this wonderful session, Power Platform and Dual Right with the Dynamics 365 perspective. I won't steal much of content there. And next of this session, we are having on 5th of October with Erwin on the future of development and administrator in Dynamics 365 financial operations. Thank you so much. And during the session, please feel free to keep posting your queries in the chat box. Rachit and team and myself will be trying to answering there in the chat itself. And towards the end, we will open this for Q&A session. Over to you, Johan, now.
Yes, thank you very much. And I would like to start by saying thank you for inviting me and letting me speak here. So my name is Johan Persson. I work as a senior technical specialist at a small consultancy group in Stockholm called Engage Group. We specialize in F&O. We basically just work with F&O and nothing else, which makes my job a bit lonely since I'm working with the technology and not that much within the application. So yeah. You can find me at my blog and at LinkedIn and so on. I also have 3 different podcasts. Dynamics Update is the one that is probably most yeah, well suited for this crowd. Otherwise, I have 2 different podcasts in Swedish, so maybe no one can understand what I say. But yeah, so let's get started. So the thing is, the reason why I set this session together was because we all of a sudden needed to handle this Power Platform and Dataverse thing, and we didn't really understand what it looks like, how it worked, and so on. And all of a sudden, we sort of had to relate to it and understand. So I did this just because I wanted to sort of explain to the F&O people what it looks like on the other side of the fence, on the CE fence, and also what we need to expect in order to get this up and running. And most of you guys has probably heard of dual write, and because most customers using CE and FO are looking into implementing dual write and try to use it. So we will in this session look at dual write. We will look at Dataverse. We will look at some setup and troubleshooting, a little bit looking into the future, and also a couple of lessons learned along the way. And at the end, as Deepak said, we have a Q&A. So just if you want, you can put in the questions in the chat, or you can save them for the end. So first of all, dual write. What is dual write? So it's a synchronization service between CE and F&O. The whole point of dual write is to move data from CE to F&O or from F&O to CE. So there are other ways of getting access to data. You can use virtual entities, for instance, but in this case, dual write is actually moving data between fields in the Dataverse database and the F&O database. So it's a sync engine, basically. It's bidirectional, as I mentioned. It doesn't have to be. You can actually set the rules to be whatever you want. You can sync one way or the other way, or both in that case. So the sync is done in two different ways. First, when we set it up, we do an initial sync. So that's basically to get the data to a known state so that it's synced in both environments. And then going forward, we are doing incremental sync. So as I said before, it's synchronous. So when we do change something in F&O, it's also changed in CE. And when we do it in CE, it's also changed in F&O. And that's sort of where the problem starts, because we usually have more validation rules on the F&O side than on the CE side. We have auditors, so we need to be very careful with what data ends up where, and that we fill in all of the blank boxes and so on. And these two sync solution also works in completely different ways. So we will come to that in the sort of the troubleshooting part of the session later. There are standard mappings for all of the standard entities. If we have custom entities, we can tweak them, we can change them, we can add new ones, we can define which fields are synced with which fields on one side or the other. But we can also customize the default mappings, of course. So we can, for instance, change field length, and we can change if we have drop-down boxes in one of the systems, we can specify how to handle those in the other systems and so on. And then we use like Power Platform solutions to basically save our setup for dual write, and then moving it between environments. Because that's actually one of the tricky parts here. I will get back to this going forward as well. But when we, from the F&O side, see dual write, we go into F&O, we go to data management, we go to dual write, and we think, okay, here is the form where we configure dual write. But what we need to understand here is that that form doesn't have anything to do with F&O. It's basically hosted in Dataverse. So when we click into that form, if we don't have permissions in Dataverse, we will not even see the form. We can't do any changes. And it's also a bit tricky because you have probably bumped into the timeout thing in F&O. So if we don't use F&O for a while, it will tell us, so I'm about to log you out because you haven't used the system. So if you're in configuring dual write, then it will actually show you this notification, even though you are working all the time in the dual write interface, because the dual write interface is not part of F&O, so F&O doesn't understand that you're working somewhere. So it's basically just an iframe. You can also filter and transform the data. I mentioned that before, that if we have, say we have number fields in one of the systems, and we have a drop down that corresponds to these values in the other one, then you can actually say that, so if we put in a number 1 in this field, it should be set to sales order in this field, for instance. If we put number 2, then it's a vendor purchase or whatever. So we can actually do quite a bit of transformation between these two systems. And then we also have complete end-to-end scenario that Microsoft has given us. So for instance, prospect to cash is one of those. We can actually set up the entire flow of prospect to cash in dual write so that all of the entire process is actually supported by dual write in this case. So the next question is, why should we use dual write? I mean, we have gotten by with different kinds of ways to sync CE and F&O before, and why do we need to use dual write instead? So there are a couple of reasons. First of all, it's an out-of-box solution. It can be customized, of course, but it's still an out-of-box solution. If you have a fairly standard system, then you have a fairly standard mapping setup, which is sort of almost done. We do need to relate to Dataverse anyway, because very many of the new functionality in F&O is actually using Dataverse on the backend. So all of the add-ins that you see in LCS, for instance, are using Dataverse as a backend. If you're syncing data through Synapse Link for Dataverse to a data lake, Dataverse. If you're using data events or business events, Dataverse. You're back to Dataverse again. So you still need to have Dataverse anyway. So it might be that you could just as well have dual write instead. The environment needs to be Power Platform enabled. So you need to connect the F&O environment to a Power Platform environment in order to get dual write to work. If you have thoughts about doing low code, no code development, then you still will need Dataverse and Power Platform anyway. So it's probably the right way to think of it. The solution is resilient, which means that if we have a maintenance window for F&O, if we deploy a package to production, then dual write will actually pause during the deploy and then resume once we're up and running. So there is actually a queue which saves the transactions and pushes them into the system that was down in the meantime and so on. So that's actually one of the parts as well. These pre-made mappings and also the business process flows, I think, are a very good reason why we should think about dual write, because a lot of it is pre-made and we don't have to build it from scratch. And the most important one, it's Microsoft's method of choice. So if we want a supported solution, if we don't want to do all of the heavy lifting and all of the development by ourselves, we actually need to use this solution because it's the one that Microsoft is supporting in this case. So the connection between F&O and CRM. You might ask yourself why there is a couch in the picture. It basically it's there for two reasons. You know, when you move in with someone and they insist on bringing that ugly, huge couch and putting it in your tiny bedroom apartment, which means that it doesn't really fit. It looks ugly, but they insist on having it because they had it in their previous apartment and they really like it, and it's the one that they have lived their life on. So they won't accept you getting rid of it. That's sort of what CRM, what Power Platform and F&O is to each other. So we are actually moving into Power Platform. We are moving all of our solutions, and we will come to that in the future part of the presentation as well. But more and more of the F&O logic is actually moving into CE. So we are the ones who have the couch. We are the ones who are moving in and who can't get rid of the couch. And the CE people is like, okay, we had it nice here before, but now you go here and everything is screwed up. The second reason why this couch is here is because it's sort of a trick. It's to trick you into remembering why we are talking about this and why we are trying to figure out how to do this. So in order to do this connection, we go into LCS and we connect an environment to a CE or a Power Platform environment to FNO. So there are a couple of things here that we need to understand. First of all, in order to do this, we need to be in the correct Azure AD tenant. If we're not in the correct tenant, then we won't be able to connect anything, because Power Platform depends very much on that you're in the correct tenant. Otherwise, things won't work. The second part, there is actually a way that when we set up a new environment, we actually get the default Power Platform environment, which is empty. And it's not connected if we don't tell it that it should be connected. But either way, you still get the environment. So should you use that one or not? I was under the impression that that was the whole point of setting up a new environment. But my CE colleagues has actually told me that you shouldn't use that environment. And the reason for that is that the defaults in that environment are set based on your Azure region and on your Azure tenants. So if your IT people set your Azure tenant up a long time ago, they might not match what you're using today. And some of those default settings can't be changed easily. So the only way to change this is basically to do a copy of an existing environment that is actually working into your CE environment. So the solution is to have your CE environment and connect your existing CE environment instead of creating a new one and using the new one. So once you have connected a CE environment, you can actually remove the other one, the one that was created by default. But as I said before, a lot of things are depending on the fact that we have Power Platform set up. Data events and business events, of course. Data Lake will require Power Platform. Synapse Links for Dataverse and all of the other add-ins also will require this. You will actually be able to, both in LCS, as long as it lives, and in Power Platform Admin Center, see which environment is connected to which one. You will see there that there is an environment URL for the CE environment, and then that there also is a finance and operation URL for your FNO environment, and that's an important part if you need to, so that you're sure that they are connected correctly. So the initial setup is actually quite simple. You do it from the LCS side, and you select that you want to have a different Power Platform environment, and you choose which one, and then you deploy a template to that environment. Normally, you use the Dynamics 365 standard with dual write template if you're going to use dual write. But this is sort of where you will get your first hurdle, because you need to tell the CE people that you're deploying things into their Power Platform environment. It won't break anything, at least nothing big, but it will sort of be a bit of an annoyance when they do deploys between their environments, because normally they move solutions between environments, and this is another solution. So there might actually be dependencies that will not deploy correctly if we don't have the same solutions in all of the environments. So they probably need to do the same thing for their dev and their production environment in order to get this working and test as well. So when you set this up, you will deploy a solution into their environment. And then after, you can also set it up. You can set it up initially when you set up the environment, and you can set it up after the environment is provisioned, as I mentioned before. There used to be a way to set it up through the dual write screen within FNO, but that has been deprecated. You are no longer allowed to connect it from the dual write screen. You are only allowed to reset the connection from dual write, and that doesn't actually mean removing it. It just means resetting it. So it's the same connection, you just start over again. And that is actually one of the big things that is important to take away from here. Once you have connected Power Platform to FNO, you can't remove it. There is no supported way to remove the connection. So if you connect the wrong environment, then you have a problem, sort of. Which also means that you can't, at a later stage, if someone on the CE side, for instance, think that we can set up a new CE environment, migrate everything over, and then just switch them, not going to happen. That won't work. So you need to understand the limitations of this. So as I mentioned before, we can set it up during provisioning. In that case, we select template, we use the default environment, and then we get it started. But the most usual way to do this is actually doing it from LCS after our FNO environment has been set up, because most of us has an FNO environment, so we need to set it up. So we can link a new environment, the one that was created by default, or we can link an existing one. And as I said before, you need to be in the right tenant, because if you don't have permissions and licenses for Dataverse, then you won't be able to do this, because then you don't have the correct permissions. It's also recommended that you use the service account that you use for setting up FNO should probably be used to set up the link to Dataverse as well, because there are some flows created when you set it up, and those flows should probably not be run in a context of a user that might get fired or that might quit, because then they will be orphaned and they might not work correctly afterwards. So that's probably a good plan. And as I mentioned before, once it's set up, we can't unset it up. We can reset it. We can purge all of the temp tables that are being used for dual write, but we can't remove it completely. We can't link it to another environment. There is a caveat. You can probably do this by asking Microsoft. They have actually helped us in some cases to do it, but it's a support case. And if you look at Microsoft Learn, they are saying that it won't work. So they are not supporting this in any way, shape, or form. Same thing here. When you do reset, since this is a form that is in Power Platform, you need to be in the correct tenant again. You need to have access to the correct Power Platform environment, and you need to you can't switch environments. You need to do this when you do a refresh. You need to do it when you do a refresh because.
Varför slutar det så tidigt? Va?
Okay, sorry. Okay, that's done. So you need to do this when you refresh the environments, because if you move a database from production, for instance, down to UET, and you have dual write set up in UET, you need to purge all of those connection linking tables and have them set up again. But that is done. So that in the database of FNO, there is information about the mappings and the linking between FNO and CE. But once you reset it, they are purged, and you get the new environment information from each of the environments, and you put that into the database so that they will be correct for the new one. When you set up field mappings, the same thing there. We do this in the dual write mapping solution, and we have dependencies. So we need to understand that you can't normally you can't just pick one mapping, activate it, and you're done, because there are dependencies to those mappings. So for instance, customer is a good example. Customers has dependencies to customer groups, which has dependencies to payment terms, which has dependencies to, and yes, you understand, there are a lot of dependencies, so you can't really just import one of them. So in order to understand those dependencies, if you click the link that I've marked with red here, show related table mappings, then you will see all of the table mappings that are dependent of that one that you're trying to activate. When you do an activation of a table mapping, you probably need to do an initial sync first of all. So what the initial sync does, and this is why I told you before that it works in different ways. The initial sync actually sets up a DMF job, creates an export in a CSV format. You need to remember the CSV part. I will get back to that. It creates an export in the CSV format, and then it sends it over to the CE side and imports it there. That's the initial sync. So the initial sync is not working the same way as the regular sync. When it comes to the CSV part, we will go through this in the lessons learned as well, that if someone has gone in and changed the default CSV format of DMF, then initial sync won't work. Because if the format is not correct, then CE can't read the file. And if CE can't read the file, we won't get anything on the other side. And that almost always looks like you will get the lines on the CE side, but they will be completely empty, and then it will fail. So try to have people not fiddle with the standard default formats, but that's sort of the same with basically all other default setups in F&O. Please don't change them, create new ones instead. It's easier and you won't break as much. There is also some guidelines here. If you're doing migration, for instance, you should probably not use initial sync to migrate data. And that has to do with the volume of migrations. It's probably not a good idea to do large bulk move of data using initial sync. And it's even like if you need to, for these to be in sync, say that you have a couple of million customers, for instance, you should probably pre-prep the environments with the same data before you turn on dual write, so that you know that they are in fairly much in sync once you turn it on. In that case, these mappings, once they are set up and done, will be moved into solutions in Power Platform. So you move them by exporting a solution and importing it into a different environment. And as before, you need to be in the correct tenant. So that's a caveat as well. So regarding the solutions, there are a couple of default solutions that is being used, that Microsoft says that you will use. They did this a couple of years ago where they split the solution into multiple ones. Before they used to have one or two solutions that you imported, and then you got all of the mappings in the same place. Now they've split them up into different solutions for different areas within F&O. You can see here there is human resources, supply chain, finance, notes, asset management, and there are of course some core ones. So you always need the core ones, but you don't always need all of the other ones as well. But just like with the mappings, there are dependencies between the solutions. So in some cases, it will tell you can't install this solution because you don't have the other solution installed. So you need to install them. And just with all of the other solutions, when we do deployments between CE and between CE environments, there are versions as well. So once in a while, you need to go into Power Platform Admin Center and verify that you have the latest version and do updates of the mappings. So yes, they are updated by Microsoft, so you need to deploy new ones once in a while. And the mappings that you set up within F&O, those are also bundled in a solution. So you don't have to set it up manually in each environment. You can actually move your customization and your setup between environments in the same way. And then we have the global address book. because that is sort of an issue, because the problem is that there is nothing like it on the CE side. And here we actually see one of the issues with setting up dual right between CE and F&O. And the big part here is that we are actually not speaking the same language. We have things that we have a word for on the F&O side, which doesn't even, in some cases, doesn't even exist on the CE side, like the global address book. But in some cases, it's actually exists, but it's something completely different. So we need to understand that as well. So there are slight differences in the data model between F&O and CE. And I say that with a lot of irony in this case, because they are basically completely different. There is nothing like it at all. If you remember from the AX side, we have actually normalized tables to an extreme in F&O. So much so that we have actually bundled them together again into entities to have them work in a workable solution in some cases. There are much more abstractions on the CE side. And so just try to explain to someone on the CE side what the global address book actually contains. Is like, okay, so it contains customers. Check, I understand. Oh, it contains contacts. Yeah, a bit weird, but that's okay. It also contains all of the vendors. What? Okay, so vendors, contacts, customers, that's sort of the same. Then it contains all of our workers. Okay, so employees, that is. Yes, employees. And then it contains all of the teams of employees that we have. So we have all of this in the same table. Yes. And then we have legal entities as well. They are also in the global address book. And when you say legal entities to a CE person, they actually think, so customers. No, legal entities is not the same as customers. Legal entities are only internal for our companies. And they don't even have the concept of legal entities on the CE side. That doesn't even exist. They have something called business units, but that's not the same. So in this case, we actually had to, or Microsoft rather, had to build a different entity on the CE side called company. And that company is basically a one-to-one mapping between our environment, between our legal entities, and we have created a concept on the CE side that is actually the same. So that makes it a bit hard, but it also shows us that the main problem here is actually agreeing on how things work. I just put this in here because one of my colleagues had a saying a long time ago that dear party table is no party. So in that case, yeah, in this case, it actually makes sense. But as I said before, there is no concept of legal entities on the CE side. So we have created the concept of company, which is the same thing. But you need to be careful when you speak to the CE people, because they don't mean the same thing that you do. For instance, I mean, we can look at contact, for instance. Contact on the CE side is a very important concept. It's sort of one of their main concepts that they are working with. On the F&O side, a contact is like almost like metadata. It doesn't really matter. It's something that we use to maybe call someone if they haven't paid their invoice or something. So we need to understand that things have different importance on different side of the fence, so to speak. Yeah, this is just to illustrate that in some cases we do need to update the core solutions and the solutions that Microsoft have provided for us as well. Yes, so let's continue. Why doesn't this work? It's not continuing. So a bit of thinking about the future. So most of you guys have probably heard of One Dynamics One Platform. I know that there are some sessions before about the developer situation going forward and all of that. So this will very much change how we look at these two environments, because right now I don't see them as one product. They are two products, very intimately linked, and that's important to understand, but it's also they are not like one. I usually compare them to like Office. Excel and Word are not the same, but they are very tightly linked to each other. So what will happen going forward is that there are basically 4 initiatives in the One Dynamics One Platform program. So developers, you guys have talked about before. It's the new situation of environments and how to handle them and how to develop for them. Then there is the admin solution, which basically means that we will be moving F&O from an administration standpoint into Power Platform Admin Center, which means that LCS will eventually go away, at least for managing F&O environments. And that also means that we will be doing refreshes, we will be doing deployments and so on in the same way for both environments. And I would like to stretch so far as to say we will probably do them simultaneously as well. Because if we have a tightly coupled system, it doesn't make sense to do development only on one side or only on the other side, because there are things that will eventually have dependencies. So we will need to be able to do that going forward. And the data also need to be in sync between the different environments as well. So the whole point here, when it comes to convergence, this is just me guessing. I don't think that in a near future we will see these two being one system, because it doesn't really make sense. They have 2 different requirements in order to understand how this works, and there are different dependencies on and requirements on like database performance and everything like that. So I think that they will, for the foreseeable future, be sort of split apart, but we will see them go together more and more. What I do think that we will see is that there will be easier ways to interchange data between them. I think that we will see that dual write is not going away, but it will evolve and get better. And then we will use more and more of virtual entities, for instance, meaning that we will have other ways of exposing data between the different environments. We also already today see a simplification of embedding forms from one system in the other and vice versa. And I think that's a really, really good thing, because people who don't need to be in F&O should probably not be in F&O. And the same goes for CE, I would say, because there is a risk that we need to have dual systems just because they need to do one minor part. So I think that can we expose that part into the other system, then we will make things a lot easier for our end users in this case. So when it comes to lessons learned here, there are a couple of them. First of all, initial sync and continuous sync doesn't work the same. We need to understand that, and we need to see to it that both of them works correctly. So just because we can do the one of them doesn't mean the other one works. We need to be beware of the dependencies between the different entities. There are dependencies that we need to take into account, and yeah, those are important. Customizations on both sides, whether it be CE or F&O, makes things a lot harder. So changing thing on one side doesn't really mean anymore that we are only changing it on one side. So it even strengthens the story that we should probably in some cases stay away from customizations a bit. The address structure and the structure of data in both systems is very, very different. We need to understand that, and we need to take that into account. And in some cases, setting this up from the F&O side will probably require someone from the CE side to be part as well, because my experience is that there are very few people that understand both the CE side and the F&O side to the same extent. So it will be tricky to do this with only one of the competencies. Database refreshes will get a bit tricky when we have dual write active. So for every refresh, we'll probably need to reset the dual write setup and deploy the mappings again so that we have it up and running correctly in every single way. So it will add a couple of different steps as well. The important part here as well is that when you look at the dual write setup within F&O, you are actually not in F&O. It's actually a Power Platform app that is embedded in F&O. You need to understand that because it will trick you if you don't. And lifecycle management regarding the data mappings, the field mappings, is important, that you have a solution to gradually move things from dev to test to production in a controlled manner so that you don't break anything. And compatibility. You need to see to it that things that are changed on one side need to be changed on the other side as well. I would actually say this, that when we do an F&O upgrade from, say, AX 2012 on the F&O side, what we usually do is not an in-place upgrade. What we usually do is that we set up a completely new blank system, and then we move things over. We move FTDs over one by one to make sure that we have a coherent system. And then eventually, when we're going live, we move data by migrating data over. But we never like next, finish, and then we have an in-place upgrade. I would say that maybe in some cases we need to do the same thing on the CE side, because a lot of CE systems have a lot of legacy built in that they can't really get rid of in a simple way. So if we are doing an F&O implementation and we are going to use dual write, maybe, and I'm just saying maybe because I don't really know this for a fact, in some cases you should probably tell your customers that you should probably do a CE implementation as well at the same time. So set up a new blank CE implementation when you set up a new F&O implementation, and then basically move things from the old instances over to the new ones in order to get a system that works together, that is compatible, and that doesn't break. Because if you look at either of the systems, you have everything that is developed in each of the system, and then you have things that Microsoft see as best practices that are sort of not always everything that you've built into system. You have probably broken a couple of best practices rule in some cases just to get things to work. The problem when you add these two in the same mix is that the subset of things that are actually best practices on both sides of the fence is actually a lot less, because both of these systems was developed without the other one in mind. So a lot of the old best practices are probably not applicable if you're going to use dual write, for instance. So I think it's important to understand that we need, in some cases, we actually need maybe to do a complete reboot of this just to get it up and running. My final thoughts here before we go into Q&A is, yeah, as I said before, maybe F&O project also should contain CRM implementations at the same time. That's probably important. Install CRM. So this is actually wrong. I haven't changed this. This is what I used to think, that we should use the original implementation environment for Power Platform. use the one that you already have if that is the case. Should you use dedicated entities or out-of-the-box entities? So Microsoft's recommendation is actually use dedicated entities. If you're going to do a lot of dual write sync between environments, build custom entities that are as simple as possible and which doesn't contain any logics, because those are probably the ones that will break when you set up your synchronization, and those are also the ones that will create performance issues when you use them. If you don't need to move data between an environment to the other, use virtual entities instead. Expose them through virtual entities in CE instead, because it's much simpler. If you just want to show them in CE, or if you just want to add them to a Power App, for instance, use virtual entities instead. It's probably simpler. And remember the couch. We are moving into CE, and we need to sort of understand that we are maybe stepping on people's toes in some cases, and that's an important lesson, I think. So, do we have any questions?
Thanks, Johan, for this session.
Thank you.
I see one question in the chat window by Santosh Wunthakulu. Can we create a free CE trial environment as per latest Microsoft update without giving credit card details? Is that a possibility?
I don't think so. But the thing is that if you do have CE, then you can set up basically as many environments as you want, because you don't pay per environment anymore. You used to do that, but you don't do that anymore. So, but I don't think that you can set up a trial environment, actually.
Only for CE, I think we can, but we cannot set up a connected environment. Is that correct? Like, I'm not sure on.
At least I know that if you're setting up a F&O trial environment, then you can't build dual write with that one, because it's sort of not the same thing as a real F&O environment. It's some dummy version.
Thank you. There is a question from Pradeep. Dual write setup is only for tier 2 environments, or it can be done in dev environment as well?
It can be done in dev environments, but there is no option of linking the environment after the fact. You need to do it when you deploy the environment. So when you set up a cloud-hosted environment, you can enable Power Platform integrations, but you can't do it afterwards.
Thank you. I see I have someone has raised his hand. Maybe Sarah, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. I'll look in the chat window after this question. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. First of all, thank you, Johan, for the descriptive section about the dual write. So recently we have implemented this dual write for one of our clients. Okay. The problem right now I'm facing is like we don't have like there are some custom entity and as well as the out of box entities, right? So we are having both kind of entities which are working on a dual write, but there is a one out of box entity from FNO which is project category, and in CE side they have a custom table for that. But in that particular dual write job is not, you know, doing the real time synchronization from FO to CE. But yeah, initial sync is happening. Like whenever we need to push the data from FO to CE, we are doing the initial sync. But when we are expecting real time synchronization, that is not happening.
Yeah. So I actually think that it has to do with, and I am not a developer, so I'm sort of out of my depth here, but I seem to remember that there is a parameter that needs to be set in F&O to in Visual Studio. You need to set a parameter on the entity in order to sort of enable change tracking.
Yes, well, this option, Johan, is available on the front end So if you go to data management, there is option to enable change tracking. You can enable it on primary table, entire query, or maybe your custom thing. It's available there. Yeah.
Yeah, but there is also a parameter on the back end that I think is it. I'm not sure about this, but it might be in order to. I'm looking at my cheat sheet here. I think it might be that you're not allowed to do it in the front end if you haven't done it on the back end. So if it's a custom entity, it might be that it's not set up. So here you have it here on this slide.
Okay.
So especially the join mode makes it a bit tricky, because if it's an inner join, then it won't. I think it might be either inner or outer join will prevent it from triggering the synchronization. But as I said, I'm not the developer, so you shouldn't listen to me in this case.
Okay, sure, Johan.
But
No issue.
I would look there. That's probably the one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I will check this option. Yeah, thanks.
Yes.
Thanks for
Yes.
moving me, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Sairav. There is a question in chat, Johan, around. There was a question around, does it work for Business Central and CE? So I've responded to that in Business Central, there is a framework which can synchronize data with Power Platform, but that's not called dual, right? So it's called something else. But yes, there is a capability in Business Central as well. There is a question from Maxim. What about owners for synced data and security for the owners? I'm not sure if I get it correctly, but Maxim, please feel free to unmute yourself if you want to elaborate on it.
Yeah, so for example, I know that we are not longer able to assign service reader and service writer roles to security teams. And security team, as I understand, should be owner of data, or how this works.
I am a bit unsure on exactly what you mean. I saw the question. So is this on the FO side or is this on the CE side?
Yeah, it's on a FNO side in a table where we can select different units or teams as owners for data.
Yeah, I can't really say anything about that. But I mean, normally you set up the permissions by using roles and so on, and those are on the either on the database side or on the form side. But owners, I am not sure about that actually. I haven't gotten any customer asking me about that.
Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Yeah, my understanding is we have to set up security separately in CE and separately in Dataverse. So you need to set up security in both the platforms. At the moment, the security architecture is different for CE and FNO.
Yep.
So you need to make sure that right security is assigned. All right, thank you. Let's keep moving forward. There is a question from Sayabi. Thanks for joining, Sayabi. Good, glad to have you. Is there a way to move documents from CE to FO, sales order document, for instance? So what do you mean by document? Are you talking about attachments here or the table?
So from my experience, there is no way to move attachments, only table data. But what I would say is that if you want, you need to, I think you need to decide which system is actually the master of these. And in the case that you need to have them exposed in both systems, I would say that a Power App is probably the way, and try to link to that document. I think that would be the way to do it if you want it available in both sides, because there is no change tracking on documents, so to speak. So it's even if you were able to sync them, they will probably be out of sync anyway. So and if you look at the FNO side, a lot of the documents on the FNO side are actually not documents. They are actually just table data that we create the document from once we want to watch it, so to speak. So it does behave a bit differently.
Yeah, I think he mentioned he's talking about attachments. So from my understanding, there is no out-of-the-box sales order attachment sync in Dual, right? You can only sync document notes. But if you have to sync attachments, then probably use a custom integration, and you can use the standard sales order document attachment entity. So you can package everything in a zip file and send it to FNO. All right, let's see. Thanks for all the questions. We have a few more minutes. Can we map fields of two different entities from FNO to a single table of Power Platform? I don't think that's possible, but Johan, happy for you to answer that.
No, I don't think we can, but I'm sort of saying that a bit vaguely, because there is some mapping, some of the default mappings where we actually have two different CE entities mapped to the same field in FNO. So it could be possible. And I would say that if you need to do it, maybe you should try to create a new entity, which is a join between these different tables.
Yes.
So that you have an SQL view that actually shows you results from both of these tables, because then it's an entity. So then it's sort of like the global address book, that you have two different kinds of entities, but in the same table. That would work.
And there is a layer of maps over entities. So when you create mappings between FNO and CE, you are using actually maps, which is another layer of defining entities. So tables form entities, and entities are making maps, and maps are the object which you are mapping between two platforms. So you can probably have multiple maps coming out of same entities, and you can map them to Power Platform. But yeah, Harsh, please share any use case. We would like to know what is that scenario where it's needed. All right.
We have a hand raised by Gildermo.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, hi.
Good.
Regarding the last part of the presentation, let's say we have an existing customer that is using already CE, and we are doing a new implementation of FNO. What would be the best approach of enabling dual rights for, let's say, a prospect to cash scenario?
I would say that the method here would be slow and easy. So start by syncing prerequisites one by one. I would say that if you have a customer that would like to do this, I would offer them a proof of concept first of all. I would say that because we don't know exactly what you have customized on your CE side, in order to understand how this would work, I would actually tell them that I would set up a proof of concept between these two environments and verify, rather not between these two, but get an extra tier 2 environment for a month, set up a copy of the production database there, and link them together, I would say.
Okay, and then on the initial sync, the master will be the CE?
Yes, it would in this case, but as I said before, if you have a lot of data in CE, you might actually get issues with moving things into to FNO. And you also need to understand that all of the business logic that applies to CE and FNO will also be applied to the other system. So if you try to change a customer in CE, it will also try to change it in FNO. And if it can't change it in FNO, it will fail. It will actually break and give you an error message. So if you have poor data quality in CE, you will probably have a lot of issues when doing initial sync that way. And I would say it's the same if you're using FNO as a master.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Right. We're just in time. Johanna, are you okay to take few more questions?
It's okay.
Um,
I'm fine.
Thank you. Okay. So there is a question from Mark, which is interesting. He says, if I want to link an existing CE with existing addresses to a new FO with the migrated addresses from a legacy system, what challenges do I get with addresses from two systems with the global address book? Are there any best practices in this case?
Yes, I would say that first of all, you need to install the solutions into CE, which gives you the data structure. The problem is that the key for doing this is party ID. So if you don't have party ID in CE, then it won't get mapped correctly. Then you will get duplicates in all of the situations. So I would say you need to prepare your data in CE. There is actually a document on Microsoft Learn. I don't have the link here right now, but there is a document on Microsoft Learn. If you Google Bootstrap dual write, then you will get a very good document on how to bootstrap data into both of the systems in order to get the dual write implementation as simple as possible.
Yeah. I think Microsoft has published some ADF pipeline scripts which you can execute on your data to generate these IDs, and then you can decide which is the master which you want to sync, and then you can sync on both ends. But yeah, as Johan mentioned, please check out that link, because yes, once you install global address book, it introduces a lot of data model changes at both ends, and then you need to run those scripts to initialize those new fields which are introduced by dual write solution.
Yep.
I hope that answers your question. Maybe we'll take a last one. So Vontakulu, I'm not sure if it's a question, but you said you have a SharePoint integration in CE, similar way we can do integration in FNO, and will it work in bidirection when we are adding docs through SharePoint? And replicate the respective entities. I'm not sure what the question is. If you want to unmute and talk about it, or is it already answered, then let us know.
Yeah. Hey. Hi. Santosh here.
Hey.
And the question is already answered. Like the documents can't be transferred in a fund, but that it got answered
Right.
already. Thanks for that.
Okay.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Santosh. Last question, which I have answered, but maybe Johan, you can correct. The question is from Sujit. Will dual write use OData calls for sync after initial sync? And if it's using, can we see those requests? My understanding is we can't see those OData calls which are happening under the hood, but you can
we can't.
confirm
No,
that.
we can't. And one important part there is they are actually excluded from the service API protection limits, so we won't get throttled by them, but we can't see them. We can see the initial sync. We can see that as a DMF project, but we can't see the regular sync.
Right. So initial sync is using DMF, but then the live sync which happens afterwards is something we can't see. Last question from Mahesh. Do Microsoft has process to migrate existing FNO environments from LCS to PPAC in future? I think we'll have to keep an eye on announcements, but Johan, happy to add for you to add. Yeah.
There will be a migration path, and eventually they will. I think they will do it the same way that they did when they implemented the Service Fabric architecture for the FNO environment. So first of all, you will not be able to deploy any legacy environments anymore. They will all be deployed in PPAC. Then eventually there will be a transition path to get your old environments into PPAC in that case. But I think that's the way to do it. I mean, they have a similar thing today when moving environments between regions, for instance, to new Azure regions and so on. So I would guess that there will be a transition path to do this.
All right. Thank you for all the answers, Johan. Really appreciate
Yep.
it. No, we are a bit over time, but I think we have taken all the questions. But if there are any more questions, guys, feel free to drop it in the chat window. We'll try to get back to you. Please leave your contact detail if you are dropping a question. But a big thanks to everyone who has joined. A big thanks to Johan for joining us from Stockholm and making this event so nice and meaningful. Deepak is here. Deepak, back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Johan. I really appreciate. In fact, when I was listening, it was a bit of surprising news for me as well. So yeah, thank you so much, Johan.
Yep.
Again, a
Thanks
lot
for
of
letting me
things to
come.
brush up.
Thanks for letting me come.
You're most welcome. Okay, so guys, just a final note. Recording will be shared soon on uploaded soon on our YouTube channel. And just a quick reminder, the next session we have scheduled for 5th of October, that which is titled as the future of development and administrator in Dynamics 365 financial operations. So, yep, that's it. We are end of this session. Thank you so much for everyone joining in.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
session.
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Bye bye.
Yeah,
Thank you.
really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. We have a feedback form. Sorry, I just will drop it in the chat window. If you can leave any feedback, that would be really great. Yeah, should have done that a bit earlier. All right. I'll stop recording and yeah.